And we're live to go through the Keirsey ESFP performer profile. Now, Emily, if you could ask Jeff that question about MBTI and Keirsey, then Jeff can try and answer it.
Okay. I was wondering what is. I've read the book Please Understand Me by David Keirsey 10 years ago, probably. What's the difference between is it a Keirsey model maybe and the Myers-Briggs? Because in my mind, it's all kind of the same thing, and he wrote a book about it. Could you tell me more about that?
Okay. First of all, did you read the original one or 2?
I think it was 2, and it was so long ago.
Yeah, I was just curious about that, but in that, Keirsey said that he based a lot of his theories on other people, including Myers-Briggs, and so what he basically did was he was examining Isabel Myers' work, and when she said that she I don't even know if she used the term temperament, but she basically did group sort of make groups by functions together, like she would say like the introverted feeling types, and that would be about like INFP and ISFP, and so certain groupings like that were in her stuff. And what David Keirsey did was he looked at that and he said he saw more similarities between like all the NF types, all the NT types, all the SP, and all the SJ. So it was basically like he used his own observations and said these fit together better for these reasons, and he came up with what a lot of things like, what contributes to the self-esteem of each temperament and things like that. And so like basically those types, like for instance, ESTJs, ESFJs, ISTJs, and ISFJs all have these common characteristics, and then he would have that list and so on for each temperament. So basically, it's like he took some, and used the Myers-Briggs terms to say like, there's the correlation I see between these things that in temperament that had already been, observed by a lot of other people, all the way back to like Plato and stuff like that. And then I see it in this system as well. Later in his life and his career and his final writings, he went away from using the Myers-Briggs letters just because too many people had criticized him, saying he was like, using them improperly or taking it to mean something it didn't or whatever. So there was a bit of a backlash on that. And so he avoided it in his last couple of books. He still said, I see this correlation, but for the sake of having people confused that this is stuff that Myers did, I'm separating, I'm using my own terms rather than the Myers-Briggs terms. But as Ben and I have discussed a lot, we obviously see some of the same correlations that he did between those two things.
Thank you. Who came up with cognitive functions?
I don't know who came up with that term, because Carl Jung never actually used that term as far as I can tell. I mean, at least from his reading the book that most people point to from that psychological types, he never actually used that phrase. But
He just used the word function, and he actually said at the back of the book that I have no a priori reason for selecting these 4. He just selected them from experience. So thinking, feeling, intuition, and sensation. He just did it based on experience. So
yeah, he had patients, if you want to call them that, or subjects, whatever you want to call it, as a therapist, and some of it was based on that. Some people, some it was people that were had various mental illnesses, which is why some people have said, well, is his work valid for people in general because it focused on people with these issues. But I think what he tried to say was that these same things are seen on just they may not be as extreme examples of these things.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and
cool, that's really helpful.
Yeah, and he also wrote that these profiles shouldn't be taken literally, that he called them Galton-esque family portraits, where it's like you show the common resemblances, and so it's like the types in their pure form. And he said, I don't want people to think that these types exist in their pure forms. Although we do notice people in typology who really do seem to be like the profile at times, where it's like, whoa, you're super ISTJ. And so there are people like that. And then there are other people where it's like, I just cannot work out their type. And it's like, even their temperament, they could be like halfway, like, especially if like someone's like an intuitive, but like they've got some qualities of NF, some qualities of NT. And it's like, and if people can get old, sometimes when people are older as well, it can be hard to fit them into a type. And then I sort of think, well, if I'm struggling so much and it's such a slight difference, there's not really much point typing that person, because it's not a clear distinction to be useful in any kind of way.
Yeah, it's always kind of been my thing to try to simplify the type stuff, and because of that, I've had quite a few people that have like asked me for help on determining their type. But some of the time, you know, they'll say, well, but I relate to so much in like all of these different things, and my answer to that is usually, congratulations, you're a well-rounded person. You know, it's not a bad thing that you have different qualities and that you're not a stereotype. That's a good
an
thing.
extreme version of something.
Oh, one thing Keirsey did in terms of like, oh yes, before he wrote this, before he wrote the, I mean, when he wrote the original book in 1978, he had been a proper psychologist for over 30 years, dealing with schoolboys who are having trouble at school, and their issues with parents, so lots of practical experience, and he was sort of like looking at, well, these, and he sort of saw that a lot of the issues that these naughty schoolboys have, it's sort of like the artisan temperament not being well catered for in the American school system. And then he looked at the relationships with the parents, and also, and he was also, and so he was training people in, and I think he put trainer of diagnosticians of dysfunctional behavior. But the reason why I brought that up is because it's that bit about, so he's training people on diagnosing. So it's like, he's always going to try and look at concrete things. And this is what leads me towards the fact that he looked at words and tools. And then he also, I think he did a PhD thesis on, I think his PhD dissertation was on 4 kinds of intelligence. And he did like tactical intelligence for the SPs, logistical intelligence for the SJs, diplomatic intelligence for the NFs, and strategic intelligence for the NTs.
We need them all. I was thinking, I've got about an hour, a little over an hour. And just for people who are watching, like this Jeff and Thorane, like, should we introduce ourselves? I don't know who your audience is.
I just assume my audience should watch all my other videos to know these people.
Maybe you have a new viewer.
I was informed in the last hangout earlier that I'm famous, so I shouldn't have to really introduce myself. Yeah. Everyone should just know who I am.
Okay. I'm definitely not famous.
But in case there's anyone who doesn't know, my name is Jeff, and my YouTube channel is the SP Spaz for anybody who wants to check that out and hasn't.
And Jeff did the wonderful video called ESTPY, I think it was, spoof of VJ R&D, and he did a wonderful video called on his channel. I very much recommend his. I think it's ESFP preferences versus reality. Yeah. So Jeff, I know you don't like being put on the spot. Do you want to talk a little bit about words and tools, and then we can go through the profile?
Like how it applies to me, or just in general?
Just in general.
Okay, well, I mean, the basic, like, probably simplest way of coming to, you know, someone's basic temperament, at least, is to examine those two things. It's what David Keirsey said, words and tools. So basically everybody uses words in one of two ways, either in abstract ways about, you know, subjects, you know, metaphor, or concrete ways where you're actually using facts and describing things, you know, physically and that sort of thing. And then tools, in a very general sense, like basically to a, not just, you know, like mechanical type tools, but and that people tend to use those either in operative way, meaning like kind of following the rules, you know, work together with people in a expected way or a traditional way, or, you know, that way, or they use them in a way that's more practical or pragmatic or utilitarian, where it's like do whatever achieves the end result, regardless of whether it agrees with anybody's particular rules or sense of, you know, how things should be done. So again, everybody does both of those things in both categories, but most people have a preference one way or the other. It's not that they don't do both, but they're always going to sort of lean one direction or the other, is just basic premise. And so if you use those things, you basically can come up with the temperaments, because those who use more abstract words, and that's their preference to use abstract words, are the intuitive types and the two intuitive temperaments. So NFs and NTs or I. And then the two that prefer concrete words are the artisans and the guardians, the SPs and SJs. And then for the tool side, the ones that prefer cooperative in their tool usage are the NFs and the SJs, so the idealists and the guardians. And then the ones that are utilitarian or pragmatic in their tool usage are artisans, the SPs, and the rationals, NTs. So you can sort of, you know, make a square like he did in the book and sort of see how they, you know, what the two, the things that each temperament has in common with each other, and then the ones that are like opposites of each other. So the way that if you just use those particular things, then the artisans are like the opposites of the idealists, and the rationals are like the opposites of the guardians. But they also have, you know, everybody's got like sort of a relationship to each other in that square. So that's kind of the gist of that.
And his final book, Personology, he went into a little bit more on the words. Now, in general, he wrote that SPs have pictorial words, and they'll tend to talk in slang. But there are certain social things that can affect how people talk. So I remember Bradley. Bradley is African American, and he talked about he has a relative who's like super SJ, but she came from a poor background, and she like talks in Ebonics. And so David Keirsey would have maybe looked at her language and gone, "Oh, classic SP speech." But it's like because of like the background thing that can maybe affect somebody's speech. But I don't know, what do you think about that, Jeff, in terms of like the slang with SPs? Oh, is he gone? Have I gone? Have I lost my... Oh yes, I can give an example.
And we better get started on the profile.
Okay.
At a time.
How much time do we have left, Emily?
45 minutes.
I've got an hour. That's
okay. Okay. Right. Okay.
45.
Right, okay. I'll just say with slang, there's two characters in Homicide: Life on the Street. Both of them are SPs. One of them uses slang, Lewis, and there was a cat, and the other one is Frank Templeton, who doesn't. But it's like so sometimes you got to be careful and like think of other things when you're looking at language. So we're going to show the profile now. Hopefully it shows on the screen. Or the Hangout is ruined. This needs to because sometimes the technology won't show. Yes, it shows. The Hangout is not ruined. Is it? That's the wrong. I need to.
And Thorane, any like model or structure or anything that you see. I don't know. You're like a wealth of knowledge. I mean, you all are, but like just anything you have to contribute. So the purpose of this is to go through.
Yeah, I want to ask Emily to share a little bit about, to introduce yourself a little bit.
Yeah, and same for you. I'm an ESFP. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and I've been studying Myers-Briggs, that model since early college, so maybe like 10, 12 years ago. And it's just progressively it's like, the more I studied it, the more I realized, like, as a driver sensor, like, how deep it was going. And it just kind of, I don't know, it's just kind of always been a part of my adult life. And I think the last time I've read this profile or identified with words like this would be around the college, maybe early 20s time. So I'm interested in going through this with like a totally different, much more grown up. I'm still growing up, as we all are. Much more like I'm in a different developmental phase than I was when I did it the first time. So yeah. What about you, Thoreen?
Oh, Emily's my good friend, right?
Right. Oh,
I'm
yeah.
an INTJ. I'm an INTJ, and yeah, the past year it's been talking about Myers-Briggs cognitive functions, and because we're totally different, we'll be jewels, right, Ben?
Yeah.
In these socionics.
It's just weird. There's two kinds of totally different. Like, theoretically, I'm totally different from Emily, whereas INTJs are a different kind of totally different in terms of, like, if they're both rounded out individuals. So it's like, say, I usually use the example of, like, an ESFP that has an intellectual side to them, and an INTJ that actually likes to do some things. Then they're sort of like attracted towards each other. And so, like, the opposite sides of the same coin.
Yeah, because according to Myers-Briggs, we share all the functions in the main 4 stacks, right? So it's just interesting to see, because my driver is Emily's inferior, and her driver is my inferior. So there's a lot that I've been learning from Emily. It's been talking to her. So it's just fascinating to talk about this stuff. So, yeah.
It's also just nice to have met Thoreen as a friend, because it's like, I very clearly feel my weaknesses. I know what they are, just like I very clearly feel my strengths. And it's nice to have someone that's kind of like, my weaknesses are his strengths. And so if I have questions or like, hey, how can I do this? Like, he's just very considerate and helpful, because he also understands that his weaknesses are my strengths and vice versa. So it's just a very like open learning mutual mentorship, which is how every great friendship should be, I think.
Yeah. Thank you. So is there anything else you want to say? Or get started?
Right then, okay. If we, so Emily, I'd like you to read through the first paragraph to yourself. You don't have to read it out loud because I'm showing it on the screen, and just comment on bits which strike. And what I've done is I've highlighted in pink bits which I feel are actually FE. I think it's like FE kind of behavior, those bits in pink. Now this and this one isn't as consistently highlighted as some of my other ones. So I've got pretty much going through this. I've got like in orange the more of the SP kind of, more of the extroverted sensing kind of stuff, and I specifically marked this up to show how the ESFP uses FE, even though ostensibly it isn't in their 4-function MBTI model. They certainly have skill at extroverted feeling, but it's to serve their artisan needs. Usually bringing attention to themselves.
That'll be a double layer of commenting then. Yeah, and if you guys have anything to say about observations, do you guys, other than me, do you know any other ESFPs personally, and Jeff? I know maybe one, maybe two, not many.
I remember talking to one about 10 years ago, and like I was being very theoretical, and she replied, "Do you always talk like this to people?" There's a bit of a conflict there.
That's hilarious.
Just a little bit of conflict.
Yeah.
Okay. The performer. Performing is putting on a show or demonstration of some kind to entertain others, and ESFPs are the natural performers among the types. people for whom it can truly be said, all the world's a stage. Playful, I'm going to comment on that.
Yep. Comment whenever you like.
Okay, I think just it's all the world is a stage. That's literally what it feels like. That's what it feels like. So it's easy to think in those terms. It feels like that's kind of, I don't know. That just feels very true. I might have trouble verbalizing things too. So you maybe have questions about what I say if it doesn't quite make sense. And I've never really like talked about this stuff either. This is odd. This is odd. Okay, I'll keep going. Playful and fun-loving, these expressive artisans' primary social interest lies in stimulating those around them, arousing their senses and their pleasurable emotions, charming them in a sense to cast off their concerns and lighten up. I would definitely say that's been from people, that's been feedback of why they like me. That's been a lot of feedback as to like what's valuable about me, or like they appreciate that. And it feels kind of effortless. It almost feels like I'm not doing anything. So that's been interesting. Like, I don't know if I'm supposed to feel like I'm doing something.
Yeah, I think that's one of your struggles. Is when you're starting to look at like, what are my values? Like, how am I valuable? You don't see that as valuable because it's so natural to you that you do that for people. Just by being you in your nature is valuable for me as a friend to see, because you bring me, it's like you ground me, because, you know, bring me into present, because I'm constantly in my head most of the time.
Yeah.
And it's hard for me to be present.
I've learned that from you and from the other intuitives in the intuitive awakening community. Just the contrast of being, I mean, I think I'm the only ESFP that's in that group, or so I'm learning that by, yeah, it's good to.
Keep going.
Okay, I can't see it anymore. Oh, here we go. Thank you for saying that. Okay. As a variant, okay, this is in a box for some reason. As a variant of Plato's artisans and Aristotle's hedonics, is that how you pronounce it? The ESFPs are a little different from other SPs in most respects. Like all the artisans, they are concrete in their communication and utilitarian in their use of tools. Now, what does that mean?
That means they will use the tool, the best tool for the job, approved or not. So basically, Guardians are by the book, and SPs will do it the way they bloody well want to.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I mean, why wouldn't you do that? That works, you know.
Well, the SJ will say, because you will mess it bloody up because you did not read the instructions.
Well, what if I said back to them, if you create something from nothing and fill a need or a niche or a hole, how can you mess it up if you're creating something new?
Well, that's right. You're also a creative person, so.
That's brilliant.
I mean, that's just how that's so like normal to me. That's how.
Yeah, and as people mature, they sort of learn like when is the right time to do the right kind of thing. Okay, I'm going to have to be by the book in this particular instance. I'm going to have to read these darn instructions. The quick start guide didn't work. That's usually what most people do now. They just read the quick start guide. And then something goes wrong, then they go to the manual.
I say this too, and I'm also thinking, like, I'm assuming that me or the person doing that would have good morals and integrity, and like I could trust them. So if they were doing it and they weren't if it was skipping steps or really like sketchy and shady, then I see the other side to it. How it could be not so good. They are interested in learning about arts and crafts, are preoccupied with technique, and work well with equipment. In orientation, they tend to be hedonistic, optimistic, cynical, and focused on the here and now. Now, when it says in orientation, what does that mean?
Well, that's just sort of like their motivations.
Hedonistic, optimistic, and cynical.
Oh, that's oh yes, that's optimistic about the future and cynical about the past. The way how people like. I didn't quite. Now remember, David Keirsey was an INTP, so he may have been like. Sometimes INTPs are like, well, this type's got to be like this. This one's got to have the opposite, and sometimes it's like 3 out of 4 is okay, and like the 4th one doesn't quite fit.
Yeah.
So sometimes that will sometimes come out with INTPs and our theories.
Yeah,
So-
yeah. Good. That's good to keep in mind because I do tend to just read things and try to make it fit or make it work.
Yeah,
But it's like that word's in there for a reason, so I'm kind of like,
Yeah, it's like the idea is the Keirsey will have that SJs are. They look at the past in more glowing terms. I'll have a look at the book because I've got the Matrix. It's hard to bring it up on screen. What we've got here, we've got so this, in orientation, right? Optimistic about the future. So generally, there's a lot of overlap between, especially between ESFP and Enneagram Type 7. And you're an Enneagram Type 7 like me, resembler, and we are optimistic about the future, about future plans. And I think the cynicism is towards the past. I don't quite know what that means. I would have to look in the book. Right. Seeking stimulation, yearning, trusting impulses.
what I do.
Okay, there is a the second meaning of cynical. Cynical has 2 meanings. One is being the distrust, right? The second one is concern only with one's own interests and typically disregarding accepted standards in order to achieve them.
Oh, I found the section.
Very interesting.
Here it is.
Yeah.
Cynical in looking back. We all have times when things don't turn out well, when we lose, when we take a hit, or in the wrong place at the wrong time. Each type has its own way of coping with such negative outcomes. Oh, I think what it might be is maybe he means like SPs tend not to have many regrets.
Did you hear what I said?
Did you hear that there are 2 definitions for cynical?
Yeah, I mean, because I already know what the definition of cynical means, but it's like what Keirsey means by cynical in his matrix in terms of cynical about the past.
When I feel cynical,
that's in this book. Yeah,
I think that it's really interesting that you have optimistic and then cynical because that feels for me like I'll just explain how I've never thought that's really interesting because I do feel both of those things and I feel like a pretty big contrast between them, and I'll just try to put it to words of like when I feel it. It's like it's kind of almost feels like either or, and I'm in a time period of either everything is going to be great, everything is great, optimistic, or everything is not, like, you know, like this is reality and like I have to accept reality and like looking at everything like very with what I think is just like totally like naked eyes and I'm seeing it for what it is and this is not good. Like how can I ever be optimistic again? And it's like those 2 things together, it's difficult to I don't know, like you have both of those, like the 2 sides of the same coin.
Yeah,
optimistic, pessimistic. It's just like
I've just sort of worked out what he means. It's sort of like the way he's put it in the Matrix, but what he means is that SPs are optimistic about themselves and they're cynical about the motives of other people. And like, so for instance, usually when you have SPs and NFs, like they'll be like cynical about the politics of NFs and like, oh yeah, don't be too idealistic and all that lot and roll their eyes, things like that. And so for instance, such cynicism gives SPs a huge tactical advantage over other more trusting and gullible types who can become easy marks for artisans. So
okay.
I think he may have sort of crowbarred it in there in terms of cynical in looking back. But what I can give a concrete example. SPs in sports get over a loss very quickly, whereas other types may be like really pissed off at losing a Super Bowl. The SP is like, we lost it. We'll move to another game. There's always the moment is now. Don't look back. Now is the present. No, present is now. I don't know. It means the same thing. I've lost my words. The moment is now. That's it.
Yeah, I've been going through of just like this balance of right now is the moment, here and now, but like that's true. And I think that's how I used to live, very like one-dimensionally, like this is it, and why does it matter to think about what happened? Why does it matter to think about what's going to happen? Because this is it. Like that's probably like a pure, that's like the caricature of the ESFP, and that was me. And now it's like, oh, I've learned a lot. I've opened up this intuitive side of me, and it's like, okay, oh great, now I have to reconcile that the past and the future, and it's just so much easier to just not think about that stuff and just live in the moment and just be. But that comes at a cost. Like it's good. There's pros and cons to that, to doing that. So for me, it's like finding the balance of all of those.
Right. So I'll ask Thrain to go over again what he said about cynicism. But so what Keirsey's written here is artisans can be cynical about human motives as well. They harbour no illusions about people being noble or saintly. Come off it, says the SP. No matter how virtuous we think of ourselves, we all have feet of clay. We're all ultimately corruptible and self-serving. So Thrain, what were you saying about cynicism? Because to be honest, I was slightly distracted by looking at this book.
That's okay. I think that makes sense from what Emily said about, she has two sides, and sometimes it's positive and sometimes it's negative. Would that have to do with, my question is, would that have to do with, I can repeat my definition in a bit. Would that have to do with your Enneagram type being 7? And when you're growing, you're going to 5, which is then again, being objective about your reality?
It could be. I don't know enough about the Enneagram yet. I'm at a very like rudimentary understanding of it, but it could be.
To me, it's like when I initially saw it, I thought that seems a little bit of a contradiction where you've got someone who's optimistic but also cynical, because usually those two traits don't go together.
Yeah, no. If you look at the context, right? If it's in a sentence, if you're going to put it in a sentence, they're all like similar meanings, like hedonistic, optimistic, they're all like positive right now, enjoyment. And then cynical, if it's an opposite definition, he's probably going to put a but, or however they can be cynical.
Yeah.
Since they put it, it's like listed all the similar qualities. So I'll take the second meaning of the definition, which is about not caring about the standard and just doing whatever they want to achieve their goal.
Yeah, it's just that usually what you get with people who are, it's just that what you usually find in people is that they are optimistic and they tend to have some naivety associated with that. And the people who tend to be cynical also are usually also pessimistic. And I just think that when I first saw that, I thought, oh, that's an interesting nuance there. That's an interesting wrinkle to have someone who is optimistic, but it's like, and I can see they're optimistic about themselves. They're optimistic about their own skill, about their own audacity, artistry, and all of that, but they're cynical about other people's motives. And so I sort of see it like that, is they're cynical about other people and they're optimistic about themselves because they are willing to take risks.
Interesting.
They think they can get away with it.
Let's keep going.
Right, yeah.
They want to be seen as our, what's the green highlight mean?
The green highlight. Now, when I did this, let's have a look.
Okay.
I don't know if I had a properly consistent highlight when I was doing this. Let's have a look. Green. Does green? I don't think green means anything.
Okay.
But in this particular
They
one-
want to be seen as artistic, audacious, and adaptable.
Oh, I think it means goals.
I would love to be seen as that. I would love to be seen as artistic, audacious, and adaptable, but more so, I would like to actually be those things.
Excellent. It was great that you said that, because that, like, Keirsey has that listed as the 3 keywords for SPs. Now, the 3 keywords for SJs are BDR, beneficent, dependable, respectable. I think for NTs it's air, autonomous, ingenious, resolute. And for NFs it's oh, I've forgotten what it is. Abe, that's it. Authentic, benevolent, empathetic.
Oh, okay. So I have run into feeling those 3 words from all those different types that you've said, feeling like those, maybe like in my mid 20s to early 30s, that certain people of those types were trying to like impress those upon me. Like, that's how you should be.
Yeah.
That's what you need to be. And I don't know what that is or what that says about me or them and the dynamic, but I knew that it didn't fit, and I knew that wasn't me, and I knew they were great qualities, but that's not like who I was. Like, if I didn't, if I had 3 words, like those words that are trying to be put on me are not them.
Yeah.
Artistic, audacious, adaptable, those feel great.
Yeah.
But like,
Right.
You should be benevolent, you should be whatever the SJ ones are. I definitely do not feel comfortable with those. Like, I think they're important. It's like, if you're an SJ, please do that. We need you to do that, but that's not me.
Yes, we need to have a society.
Yeah, we do. I really have come to appreciate it. Okay. Often excited, they trust their impulses, yearn for impact, seek sensation, prize generosity, and aspire to virtuosity. Does virtuosity mean having a lot of virtues?
Oh, that means like being a virtuoso, being a really artistic person.
Like, kind of, you can do every skill.
I think a virtuoso means, like, when they say, like, sometimes it's used in the context of like a virtuoso performance of like somebody doing it really, really well.
Oh yeah.
Like a prodigy.
Oh yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think usually they'll say somebody's a virtuoso if they're like a master of their art. I think that's what it means. I'm not sure.
Yeah, so I'm looking up all the definitions, like live. So virtuosity means great skills in music or another artistic pursuit. So a performer of considerable virtuosity means it's up there.
So that might be this might be a good example to give an example between optimistic and cynical, even about myself, or I definitely have directed that at myself. Like with music, I'm just getting into music now, and I'm kind of like, oh, I know that I have this aspirations to like really like develop my skills and be really good at it. But then the cynical side comes in and will kind of say negative things to undermine that. And I think that's where I would dare to say that ESFPs like generally experience that you have this potential and this aspiration, and you're optimistic about it. Even like some of the things Jeff was saying in our last call, I would like to have asked him about it now. Just like that's there, and you have the ability to like develop it and do it really well, but also the awareness of like all of the obstacles in the way to achieve it, and kind of like seeing how long that would take. I don't know if that applies, but I experienced that. Like, I am so aware of how much work there is to be put into it that I can get cynical about it sometimes. But I'm also optimistic. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It does. I think it's just part of being human.
Okay.
Honestly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of these times, these things, it's like, that should be most people.
That's good to know. Okay, intellectually, they are prone to practice tactics far more than logistics, strategy, and especially diplomacy.
Oh, I'll say something about tactics. So tactics is, it's basically, it's anything that is like very short term and expedient.
Yeah.
Whereas what can happen with we NTs is we think so far towards the future that our goals are like quite remote. And so say there's a battle between, oh, it's back, an NT and an SP. An SP could actually win the battle and therefore prevent the NT from winning their long-term goal because they've concentrated on the immediate situation.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's other times where it calls for more long-term planning, and you could say that the person has been too short-sighted. So it depends on the situation, what the best approach is, whether to be tactical or strategic.
Mm-hmm.
And then go on, Thrain.
Me?
Nah, I have nothing to say. I was
Oh,
going to
just
say tactic is short term and strategy is long term. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm trying to learn that not thinking in a logistical, strategic, diplomatic way is that's a blind spot for me, and I don't want to just live life just kind of like just going for it without having that at least a little bit of foresight. But that's kind of the balance, the struggle.
Yeah, and oh yes, another thing about Keirsey temperament theory, and we'll actually come to that. We'll come to that in a moment after we've gone through the rest of this paragraph. We'll go through the idea of role variants and how they're slightly different from types, but they do correlate well.
Okay. Further, with their friendly nature, they tend to play the informative role of entertainer over the tough-minded directive role of operator. And with their outgoing expressiveness, they lean more towards pleasing others as a performer than as a composer. And that might mean why you think this is like FE harmony, just because of that, perhaps, Ben. I think.
Oh, it's the kind of behavior where it's like in socionomics they define FE as emotional expressivity, and it's like you can basically all the types with E and F in their MBTI code. They have emotional expressivity, and they like can use typically, no pun intended, like have good people skills with that emotional expressivity.
Yeah. I definitely.
Yeah. So and like ESFPs and ENFPs, they can do the FE thing even though they don't value it.
Mm-hmm. I definitely see this play out with my business. I own a business, and I much prefer to not play the directive, tough-minded role of operator. I mean, just in like a literal sense of like operating and owning a business, I much prefer not to play that role. And I do it in a way that works. And I hire people that are really, they're comfortable with that. And they're kind of self-sufficient, but it's, yeah, it's tough. Okay.
Right. So now we got a little bit of interesting bit of theory. Keirsey wrote at the back of "Please Understand Me Too" that Carl Jung's intention was to work out what people had in mind, their actual psyches, whereas his actual intention was to work out what people did well. And like I said, Keirsey was he was what I would call a proper psychologist. He tried to be as scientific as possible, but also he had INTP tendencies, but he tried to be as scientific as possible. So it's like, let's look at intelligent roles, what people do well. So it's like SPs have a tactical intelligence, and half of them are directive and the other half are informing. The directive ones tend to go towards operator roles, and that usually tends to be, I think Jeff said this, and I heard Jeff say this in a hangout, where they're object oriented, and the SFPs are people oriented,
Yeah.
And then that sort of correlates well to feelings, introverted feeling. And even when an ISFP is on their own and writing and being creative, they're still like thinking about emotions and like the human aspect. So it's still like a people focus, even in that way. And an ESTP is an operator, but they might operate people, and I think Keirsey wrote the profile, as if they were like objects they were manipulating.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times, usually ESTPs. Now, one of the things that is a little bit tricky in these profiles is there's a little bit of an overlap, just as there is in real life, between nature and nurture. And you've got a combination of the social role, which is the role variance, and then the type. So that's why he says things like play the role of. And so if you have somebody who is an ESFP and they play the role of entertainer, there's going to be a little bit of a feedback mechanism based on the experience of playing that role, and they become better at playing that role. And then you get a sort of a weird blend between you don't know how much is the role and how much is the real person.
Yeah. Okay, that's really interesting. Yeah.
What do you think about that, Jeff, that blend thing? Because you know quite a bit about Keirsey temperament theory.
Blend thing?
Yeah, about how Keirsey's approach of using role variants versus types.
Well, I mean, the only thing I can say is that I agree with what he said about, you know, anybody can fill whatever role, but it's the closer that the role is to your most natural role, the easier it is to do. And the further away it is, the more effort you're going to be able to do. So I think there's people that have unfairly said that Keirsey deals in stereotypes, and he says, oh, well, all this type have to be, you know, like all ISTPs are mechanics or something like that, even though he never said anything like that. And in personology, he really went into, you know, more detail about how, you know, anybody who, just because their best, you know, suited role would be the crafter type or ISTP, doesn't mean they couldn't be, you know, any of these other things, a performer, a counselor, you know, an engineer, all these things, but that it would take more effort to do something that was further away from what their natural instincts are. And so that's the point he's making, is that not that any of these roles are impossible for any type to fill, but just there are certain things that we more naturally fit into and tend to reinforce those by, you know, being interested in those things and practicing those things. And so we tend to get better at those things that we're already good at.
Yeah, that was really well said.
Yeah, and usually what you get is when you get somebody who is the type, and when they enact a social role that fits their type the best, usually it's very easy to see that type. Now, sometimes with women, like say with thinking women who have been in like maternal roles, it can be sometimes harder to see their true type. So, for instance, you could have maybe an ISTJ female that had been in like an ISFJ caregiving role, and the role itself maybe like blend, and then like how much, and then has the person changed because of their role, and then you have things like that. I do remember Jeff saying though that in certain societies where, say with say ESFP females who wouldn't be able to like express themselves fully, but you can still see their type in a little way, but it's in like a much smaller way than maybe it would be, say, in the United States. But it would be like so you can't necessarily always go by behavior. You want to look at motivation, but I'm sometimes cynical of motivation because people can fool themselves. So it's like you do want to look at it's always like I want both. I want to see the motivation and the behavior, because then the behavior, like, it confirms it. Because then you've not got a case of like people thinking they're something that they're not.
And there's sort of, you know, a societal conditioning for males to kind of fill the thinking roles and females the feeling roles. And so when you have someone who's the opposite, you know, a thinking female or a feeling male, then across temperament, you have some where they might be trying to fill a role that's not as natural to them because of what's expected to them by the people around them. And of course, artisans, SPs, as sort of wanting to be the rebels, will sometimes lash out against that and be like, "This is not what I wanted to be doing," and they don't, and the people around them don't understand why are they acting this way, because they think this is how you're supposed to be, you know, as a man or a woman. And then, you know, and specifically the things I think of are like STP women in sports and more physical things. They want to do those things, but people look at it as, oh, you know, females are supposed to, like you said, do more caretaking roles. And then you have male SFPs who, you know, are more interested in things like, you know, working with children and stuff like that, and there's an automatic societal thing of, oh, there's something wrong with the male for wanting to be around children. You know, they're a pedophile or something.
Yeah.
You know, there's this automatic societal stigma against what they naturally want to do.
Yeah. And Jeff is a massive feeler. He is a huge soap fan.
I'm not
Right.
as massive. I'm losing fat.
Okay, page 2.
Right then. So yeah. So Jeff is a well-rounded individual.
Yes.
Although
But less well-rounded than I used to be.
Yeah, although I remember you said we tried to work this joke in before, where Jeff was then going to say something like, "But I'm working on that."
Yeah.
You pre-planned a joke.
Well, we didn't pre-plan it. It's just that he told me it once, so I just thought, "Oh, that would have been a great joke for a hangout."
It is. It's funny.
All right. I'll be right
Let's
back.
keep
Okay, so now we've got this thing here. So this is the idea that the ESFP is best suited to enacting the role of performer, and then the next easiest is composer. And you do a little bit of that, like when you're doing your songwriting, you'd be okay. Now I'm enacting that role, and then promoter because it's ESTP, and then crafter. And I suppose I think it's done like this because the composer will have something in common with you in terms of the composer is also is also informing and asking rather than directive. So that's something that's in common with the ESFP. Because
do you think that these words are kind of alternative words for, like, performer would be sensation, composer is FI, promoter TE, crafter NI? That kind of feels like it could be true.
No, these are specifically related to intelligent roles, intelligent social roles in society that people can perform. And so the reason why it's harder for somebody with the SFP tendencies to do, say, the crafter role is that ISTP is introverted rather than extroverted, and they're directive rather than informing. So what that is oh yes, that's something else that we get in Keirsey is he had the temperaments, and then he split the temperaments up by, he had expressive and reserved for introverts and extroverts, because it's like, hey, I want to look at something concrete, something that I can observe. I'm a proper psychologist. I'm trying to be empirical. And then it was directive versus informing. So usually it's like the STPs, it's more like they tell people what to do, just do it, and it's like, just get it done. Whereas like the SFPs try to use persuasion and will ask. And so that's where you get that dichotomy. And you have that amongst all of the temperaments. So you will have an in-charge type. Linda Barron's was sort of like the protege of, let me put it differently. David Keirsey was the mentor of Linda Barron's, and then she came up with her own system that was very much based on David Keirsey's. And then she taught Dario Nardi. And Dario and Linda Barron's worked together, literally. And oh yes, and he taught her, and he's known her for over 20 years. So within each temperament, you've got like a type that's extroverted and directive, And so you've got ESTP in the SPs, ESTJ in the SJs, and ENFJ in the NFs, and ENTJ in the NTs, and all those four are in charge initiators. Then you've got the introverted versions of that, which I'll call the contenders or chart the course, and that would be ISTP, ISTJ, INFJ, and INTJ.
Okay.
So, for instance, INTJ, like such as Thrain, INTJ resembler, they tend to be directive. Like, you know, they'll tell people what they need to do, not so much about the persuasion, but be reserved. And then another interaction style is based on being informing, and it's called the get things going interaction style, and it's more about encouraging people. It's about being extroverted and encouraging and asking questions, and that is yourself, ESFP, ESFJ, ENFP, and ENTP.
Oh.
And then the last one is the one I remember of, which is usually, and that is introverted, and we don't direct people. We just say, oh, do you want to do this? Do you want to give options? We just like that kind of thing. So it's like we're introverted and we're not directive. So that is INTP, INFP, ISFJ, and ISFP. Now somebody might say, hang on a minute. I know plenty of ISFPs who can be plenty argumentative and stand up for themselves. But it's like one of them has to be that in that temperament in the SPs. And so they're accommodating. So they're accommodating for an SP. But to other types, ISFPs, they can be like trying to herd a cat. So some types are more accommodating than others. So ISFJ is going to be more accommodating, really, than an ISFP.
Did you say the ESFP is directive?
Oh, no, informant. ESFP is informing.
And
So it's like they inform people. So it's like their interaction style is like, hey, what do you think about this? You could do this, you could do that. Have you thought about this? Whereas directive might be, you donut, why don't you do it like this? It's like, it's just more aggressive. And
that's probably, I would think that's based on like just my driver process of a learning process.
Right.
And, well, I don't know.
But I can tell you how this works out in terms of functions. All of the STs are directive, and all of the NJs are directive. All of the NPs are informing, and all of the SFs, that's it. All of the SFs are informing. So it seems that the J part, in the NJs, makes people directive, even if they're feelers, because they have that NI thing going on where they can see the way it should be. So that's sort of like that NI vision sort of like makes them overcome their natural nicety and like their natural.
And we need both. We need both. Otherwise, if we just had informing, it's like nothing would ever get done.
Yeah.
If we had directive, I don't know what would happen there, but.
And I suppose they do it with skills. So like, if you think about it, INFJ, they do direct people one-on-one. They are the counselor directing people, and then the teacher directing a large group, like the teacher, mentor, Oprah kind of leadership role. So that's another part of Keirsey temperament theory.
All right, let's keep going. We've got 15 minutes.
Oh dear, this might have to be a two-parter. Right, so, here we go.
Okay. To visualize ESFP intellectual development, consider the following graph depicting the most... Oh, we just said that. Okay, performers are plentiful, something over 10% of the population, and that is fortunate because they bring joy to so many of us. They love the excitement of playing to an audience, and they try to generate a sense of showtime wherever they are. They aren't comfortable being alone and seek the company of others whenever possible, which they usually find, for they make wonderful playmates. Lively, let me just comment on that, and then move on so we don't run out of time. But I noticed that in its purest sense, thinking back on my childhood, I mean, I was always wanting to put on some kind of little play or performance or something for my parents, and I would get my sister to do it and the neighbors to come over, and we would like, I would kind of orchestrate this whole thing, but I wasn't like, I was in charge, but I wasn't directive. I was kind of like, hey, let's do a play about this and put it on. And then it kind of just took its own little
right. So your
life.
interaction style there would have been like, get things going through enthusiasm and effing, natural charisma.
And sometimes there was a purpose to the play, like to get my parents to let us get a dog or something. It was about this play, about this dog that was going to die if we didn't take it. And we got the dog.
That is tactics. That is. I take my cap off to you. That's some good tactics.
And then other times it would just be just to sheer enjoyment of just seeing the delight on my parents' face or the neighbor's parents' face, just feeling that like, kind of like, wow, like you guys worked so hard on this and you're just doing this little play, like, you know. I mean, I don't do that anymore, obviously, but
you're walking it, dear.
But that's in me. I mean, I think that way, and to some extent, am looking for some kind of outlet or expression to get that, but without. I think that's just the performer in me.
Right, so I put here like lively, witty conversationalist. I sort of like see that as FE, the lively and the conversationalist. Then there's like expressing emotions, expressing how you feel, that kind of thing. But you know, that's just an abstraction. That's just me categorizing it like that, but it seems to fit. Right, so the next one is...
Okay. Always seem to know the latest jokes and stories and are quick with wisecracks and wordplay. Nothing is so serious nor sacred that it can be made fun of. Yeah, that's... I don't take the approach of making fun of things. I just don't, but if someone else will crack a joke, or I think ESTPs will do this kind of thing, and they'll break that kind of barrier.
Yeah.
ESFPs can do that. I personally don't, or if I do it, I'll break the kind of barrier and just like a question or like, hey, like what about this? But not so much like to make fun of it. I just don't.
Yeah, there's also, I mean, as you know, there's certain ESFPs that have more FI, who are a little bit more like an ISFP. And so others who are more so there's some variation there.
Yeah. Performers also like to live in the fast lane and seem up on the latest fads of dress, food, drink, entertainment, the chic new fashion. The In nightclub, the hot new musical group, energetic and uninhibited ESFPs create a mood of eat, drink, and be merry wherever they go, and life around them can have a continual party-like atmosphere. I mean, by nature, yes, that's all very true. And I kind of got to a point in my life where I realized like those things are not the end-all be-all. It does, you know, there's more to life than those things. So I'm kind of, I don't know, I have a push-pull relationship with a totally hedonistic kind of mindset, but also like I am drawn to those things, and I do pay attention more than I think I'm paying attention, or just like clothes or, you know, makeup, or where are people going, what restaurants are popular. Like I do know that, it's just on my radar, and I don't feel like I try. It's just like I'm just aware of it. I just know I'm drawn to it.
I'm just writing something here.
Okay. I also grew up pretty.
I don't know if you can see it on the other one.
I can't.
Oh, I've written there. Maturity, psychological, not age. What you were saying, demonstration of maturity.
I don't know what that means, but I think it's a compliment.
Yes, it is a compliment. And that's why I then put not age there.
I think I had to learn some of these lessons at a very young age because I grew up fairly poor and I wanted those things, and I wanted so badly to have the cool clothes and the cool new cars and to be those things, and I literally could not have them. And I also learned to work and what that means. Like if I want to have things, I have to work and earn them. And so I don't know, I think I worked out pretty early on. Like I became comfortable with just things that maybe some other ESFPs might not learn until later, or depending on how you're raised or how much resource you have, and then have to earn versus just given to you. I mean, that's a whole different topic, but
I think that was just an example of like nurture.
Yeah.
Maybe some nurture aspects accentuating theoretically the lower function of like the tertiary function of TE, which is like a get stuff done kind of function. And you can get ESFPs that can develop that way. And I think that in terms of Enneagram, they maybe have like a strong 3 component in their tri-type. So it's like, okay, that kind of, because if you look at, say, an ESFP that has like that strong drive for success, then usually you're going to look at them and say, oh, they've got strong extroverted thinking there. They're applying themselves, at least extroverted thinking type behavior.
Yeah. But at the same time, like if I do want those things, I want to have nice things and I want to look good and I want to wear clothes that I love and that I feel good in and that, are fashionable. So I'm not like saying I don't know. It matters to me, but at the same time, I understand. I have a good relationship with it. It's not overly materialistic.
Right.
Okay. Let's see. The performer's talent for enjoying life is healthy for the most part, though it also makes them more subject to temptations than the other types. Oh yes, totally. ESFPs are inclined to be impulsive and self-indulgent, yeah, which makes them vulnerable to seduction, giving in easily to the wishes of others or to the desire of the moment. Yep, that's all very true. Whether it's to please someone or just because it's impulsive and I don't think it through, or self-indulgent, or just hoping for the best, like, yeah, for sure. Pleasure seems to be an end in itself for the performers, and variety is the spice of life. So they are open to trying almost anything that promises them a good time, not always giving enough thought to the consequences. Okay, that lesson, not always giving enough thought to the consequences, is what I've learned these last few years. And that's why I'm like trying so hard to slow down and think things through and not just get into action and just do. But it's also, I'm finding it that it's really it's a painful place to be because I want to just be in action. I want to just go and do and like be in flow.
Yeah. So it's almost like, as Jess said in his video, preference versus reality.
Yeah.
Life has taught you to like do more stuff that we would classify as TE, like the business logic kind of stuff, and literally you have to do that running the business. So you're in a mindset of like business logic mindset, and Dario looking at the way people develop and mature, where they tend to become more like their opposite type, their dual. So in your case, Therain, INTJ, where they work more on the TE, so business logic, practical thinking, and also NI, which would be, I suppose, intuition of time, long-term planning, thinking about the consequences, that kind of thing. Because if you think about it, INTJs, what do they do best? Long-term strategic planning. And sometimes, though, INTJs are held back by their own pessimism. And so they become critical too much of their own projects, and they have a problem enacting their plans. So
I can see how that would feel like on the flip side. How would that relate to you, Therain?
Yeah, because we can. I guess which is why I've been working on SE and FI. The more healthy my FI gets, and the more in the moment I can be. So I call that doing courage. So instead of constantly in NI and seeing all the possible consequences and not actually having the courage to implement, because I can see, the consequences of, if I made a decision to implement certain project, I can see the feedback in terms of, I can predict what's going to happen, right? There's always a chance of failure. So instead of thinking that, okay, that could be the consequence, and if that's the case, how am I going to feel? And if I don't like the feeling, right, I wouldn't implement. It used to be the case. Whereas now I just say, because I wouldn't know until I implement and get the feedback. Because sometimes, most of the time, what you think in your head and what the feedback that the work gives is different.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm more in FI and SE and TE implementing. So I talk about that in one of my videos on my channel. I started a INTJ channel called Insights to Impact, which is exactly doing what I know, the knowledge that I have that I can share and making an impact, helping other INTJs from my experience and from the healing that I've done on myself, right? So I'll agree with Ben. Yes, we can be too critical of our own vision and what we can see, and not doing anything with it, versus going forward and just giving it a go and actually be adaptable in the moment from the feedback, rather than being cynical about our own prediction.
I have a question for you about that. So like, you can
Mm-hmm.
see it, you can see where you want to go. That's like blows my mind. I wish I had that. You see where you want to go, like, and you can how do you know that that's really what you want? How do you really know that, like, when you get that, or when you get to that point, like, you'll be happy, that's what you want?
I guess that's the challenge. It's
Working on your FI.
Yeah.
Because that's about your values, what you want.
Mm-hmm. Because I know that that's according to my value.
Yeah.
So in one of my videos, I talk about FI, the aligning of vision and values. So NI is the vision, and values are FI is about. So aligning the value, vision, vehicle. Meaning vehicle is the project, the goals, the business, the whatever expression of the value that you want to express to reach the vision. So working on FI, knowing what I really want and what I am about. So the more I know about myself and what I really want, and that also comes into SE as well. It's knowing what I want to experience. So SE is about experience. So knowing what I want to experience and integrating that into NI and FI to know that becomes part of the, I guess, the path to reaching the vision. Even
just like being able for you to like distinguish NI as the vision and FI as the values is super helpful, because a lot of times they become kind of one and that might be that I feel anxiety over it. It's like,
yeah,
but separating them feels more clear. That's so valuable.
Yeah, I'll send you the video.
I gotta watch this video.
Yeah, it's the best way to define NI as the vision thing, the intuition of time, where it's in its most mystical form. It's the person who is like tapped into the way things are going to develop, the foreseers of the future. And whereas the INTJ is doing it in a sort of a more of a logical kind of way.
I can see how that would be tough to get into action for that type, because it's like, so much. Like that's like, it's very overwhelming, I would think, to just go for it.
There's also maybe a thing where I associate NI also with the unconscious and maybe being in downtime, and SE is a bit more being in uptime. And it's like you have to get out of that thing in order to then enact it with the extroverted sensing. So, and so
I like
it's
that, downtime and uptime. Yes.
Yeah.
What was it? Double time and what?
Downtime and uptime. There's a thing in
Down.
NLP that downtime is like when you're like in a trance and you're like in an unconscious state, and it's like to do with dreams and like all internal and fantasies and daydreams. And uptime is like when you're like, Dario, like immersing yourself in the present context, like totally focused on the situation that you're in. So pretty helpful when you're, in a fighter pilot or a surgeon or dancing or singing.
Downtime for me, what ideally would be great is just dreaming, sleeping and dreaming. And then uptime is when I'm awake. That's kind of how I think of it. I don't know if that's very classic ESFP or not, but
a little bit from Socionics is that theoretically INTJs have very low energy, and so it's like, I suppose, like Enneagram 5, it's like so I suppose they become stingy with their energy and they learn to prioritize what little energy they have. So, like,
that's very true.
Wisely.
Which is why we spend so much time in our head, imagining, okay, if I take this route, what's the consequence going to be? And if I take this route, what's the consequence going to be? And because if I don't work it out in my head first, then I end up going both routes, and it's a waste of energy for me. Well,
everything you guys are saying, it applies, and that, like, even you helping like other INTJs, like you can help more than just INTJs with this stuff. I know you know that.
Yeah, I've been coaching. I'm a transformational coach, so I coach people. But I think the most effective way, it's like for me to focus on, is coaching INTJ, because we think like the same way.
Yeah,
that's INTJ being lazy. That's the easiest.
Well, with you saying, like, that's kind of something else that I've learned since reading this last profile, like, or just these last few years, is like just getting in action and go, and like doing all the time without foresight or setting up a system that is gonna keep me, I don't know, from overdoing it, doing too much, burning out. That's kind of where I'm at now. It's like I've been gearing up to, I don't know, go and about to do something. But I'm kind of like, I had this voice being like, but you don't want to make the same mistakes as last time, which are just jumping in and going without a plan, without thinking about where these paths are going to lead, because they're going to lead somewhere. They always do. And those are my weaknesses. And that's why I'm just like, I feel like I have all this energy, or it's building back up, but I don't want to waste it. I don't want to just go and then burn out and then have to start again.
And then we've got ENTJ, so different from INTJ, because you've got a type that's got a ton of energy.
Yep.
And it's like they just make themselves ill because they work themselves to death. And in Socionics, their SI break. And Socionics defines SI as comfort sensing. So it's like you get a lot of times where they'll have like stress-related illnesses through overworking themselves. ENTJs.
I was just talking with an ENTJ friend, and really got to see up close the blind spot of introverted feeling, which was really interesting. It was like he said these words. He's a business guy. Like, I feel, and he doesn't know really about Myers-Briggs and all of this, but he said, I feel like I have all of this potential, and like tomorrow I could just start a company and I can see like exactly where it would go, and I would know exactly how to do it, but I wouldn't know, and it would work, but I wouldn't know if I wouldn't know how I felt about it. I wouldn't know if that's what I should be doing. And it was like, I just felt like this kindred understanding of like in a different kind of way.
Yeah, Gamma Quadra. It's the SFPs and the NTJs are the Gamma Quadra.
And that's why I think it's so important that we have friends that are different than us, and like people that can kind of like we can bounce things off of, because nobody can do what they want to do and like fulfill their potential alone. Nobody. I don't care who you are. You can't. You could get far and you could do a lot, but like you have a lot of limits and blind spots. You know what I mean? That's what I think.
Right. Emily, how much time do we have left?
Well,
Could we
I
try
can
to get
see-
to the end of the paragraph? Because then I
Yeah.
can like shade it off and then we can like do the next.
yes.
So
Yes.
if we finish off paragraph 4, then we can end.
Okay. The performer's talent for enjoying life is healthy for the most part, though it also makes them more subject. Oh yeah, I already read that. Pleasure seems to be an end in itself for the performers, and variety is the spice of life, so they are open to trying almost anything that promises them a good time, not always giving enough thought to the consequences. I've been paying attention more to that. Most often they will do what they feel like in the moment rather than what is good for them in the long run. Yep. Chalking it up to experience or blaming someone else if things don't turn out well. Yeah. And now I'm facing some consequences of like seeing some decisions and things like kind of they've run its course. I've burned out, and now I'm like seeing things like whether it's just stress in my body and my body giving out, or a relationship, issues in a relationship. I feel like I'm at a really interesting like time period like in my life. Like it's like I see my life as like this line, and then there's like little lines, like highlights of like big events that have happened or I've done in my life, and then little ones. And it's like I'm approaching like a next big kind of like mark. And I want to learn from the past. I don't want to just continue to go and go and go. Like I want to pause and kind of like look at everything and like reconcile the past to the present and then move forward. But that's in direct conflict. I just want to, all I want to do is just keep going and going and going and go fast. But it feels healthy to kind of pause, reflect, learn, make some decisions, think about the future before I do that. It's just, this is new. I've never done that before. So it's like this like internal push-pull. Anyway, that's where I'm at.
Yeah. Emily definitely seems to be the sort of ESFP that shows a lot of axis between FI and TE. A lot of this is also due to you actively working on that, thinking about values and what's important to you, and also just the experience of running a business, getting into that mindset, that TE mindset.
Mm-hmm.
She's been doing a lot of work on her stuff, so that's so good to see.
Also, maybe the effect of terrain as well.
Oh yeah, he's influenced me a ton. He's not stopping. I can't stop. Nobody's stopping. We're going. We're doing this.
Yeah, part of what I love about Emily is the curiosity and the willingness that she has to work on herself and grow. I love that in people. One of the things we've been talking about is starting a channel, because we've been thinking about bridging the gap between sensor and intuitive, also feelers and thinkers, instead of so that we can understand each other better, right?
There's so many miscommunications and fights and problems and like disconnected relationships, even between like family members, that just I just don't think that it has to be that way.
Yeah.
So folks, we will continue the rest of this profile. We'll do from paragraph 5 to 10. This profile in a subsequent video. So I'll stop the recording now, and then we'll have a little chat to organize when best to do the next hangout. So bye-bye.
Yeah, thanks for putting this together, and thanks everybody for watching.
Okay.
We love your feedback.
Sorry, I couldn't contribute more. My Wi-Fi went out at home, so.
Oh,
Yep. That's okay, Jeff. You up front, you contributed a lot with going through the Keirsey theory. Yep. So I'm going to say bye-bye to the audience, but please don't disappear.
Bye.